Anna hadn't heard a sound in hours. Not the hum of the fridge, not the creak of the floorboards, nothing. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the corner of the ceiling where the shadows pooled like spilled ink. It wasn't unusual for her to feel uneasy in the apartment late at night, but tonight, the quiet pressed against her skull, heavier than it ever had. She tried to read, but the words on the page seemed to twist under her gaze. A sentence would start in the middle of a line, the next word misaligned, and sometimes the page itself seemed to breathe. She closed the book and pressed her face into her hands. A soft thump echoed from the hallway. Anna froze. Of course, she thought. I'm imagining things. But she couldn't convince herself. Her apartment was supposed to be empty. Hello? She whispered, voice brittle, as if it could shatter. No reply. She got up, careful not to make a sound, and stepped into the hallway. The air smelled faintly of damp carpet, and the light bulb overhead flickered once. The thump came again, closer this time, and Anna's stomach knotted. She told herself it was nothing, a settling building, a stray branch outside, but even her own rationality sounded hollow. In the bathroom mirror, her reflection lingered a second too long. She blinked, and the reflection blinked back after her. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She jumped and grabbed it. A message from her roommate. Are you home? I hear something strange. Anna's hands shook. She hadn't told anyone she was alone tonight. The clock ticked. She stared at the numbers, 2:13. A pause. 2:14. Then the whisper came. Barely audible, but distinct. Anna. Her heartbeat stuttered. She spun toward the voice, but the hallway was empty. She could see the living room, the kitchen, the front door, nothing. Just the shadows, dark and still. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Who's there? Silence answered her. Not the comforting kind, but the thick, expectant kind. For days after, Anna's friends noticed subtle changes. She jumped at corners, avoided mirrors, and sometimes she would pause mid-conversation, staring into empty space. She told them she was tired. They didn't press. But at night, the whispers returned. Sometimes a name, sometimes a question she didn't remember asking. Sometimes it was her own voice calling from the dark. One morning, she woke to find her apartment rearranged. Furniture where she didn't leave it. Drawers slightly open. Her books on the floor, pages torn out. She couldn't recall doing any of it. She began keeping a journal, writing down every sound, every movement, every flicker of light that seemed wrong. But even in her own notes, words shifted on the page when she wasn't looking. Scribbles became sentences. Sentences became accusations. And then, one evening, Anna found a photograph tucked under her pillow. It was her, asleep. Her eyes open, staring. She swore she had taken no photo. From then on, she stopped sleeping entirely. Every creak of the apartment, every flicker of shadow, every faint whisper was a confirmation, she was not alone. Not by a visitor, not by a roommate, not even by a stranger. By something that knew her more intimately than she knew herself. Weeks later, the landlord came by. He found the apartment empty. No sign of Anna. Just the journal on the floor, open to the last page. I hear myself calling from the dark. I am no longer sure which voice is mine. The room was silent. But if you listened closely, the faintest whisper seemed to echo from every corner, waiting. Second story. Elliot had always liked the quiet. After a chaotic childhood, silence was a kind of safety. That's why he'd rented the small top-floor apartment on Hawthorne Street. It had old wooden floors that creaked, a single window overlooking the alley, and, most importantly, no neighbors above. At first, it was perfect. Mornings filled with the hiss of the coffee maker, evenings with the faint hum of the city below. But after a few weeks, Elliot noticed it, the tapping. Soft, deliberate, like fingernails against the ceiling. At first, he dismissed it as plumbing or settling boards. But it never came at predictable times. Sometimes at midnight. Sometimes in the early afternoon. Always when he was alone. One night, Elliot lay in bed, listening. The tapping came again, slow and patient. He held his breath, counting the seconds between each knock. 1, 2, 3, pause. Then a whisper, almost beneath the sound, curling around the edges of his hearing. Elliot. He bolted upright. Who's there? His voice was small, swallowed by the ceiling and walls. Silence. Days passed. The tapping continued. Sometimes it was a rhythm he could almost follow. Sometimes it was random, a kind of mocking code he couldn't decode. He tried calling the landlord. She assured him no one lived above him. The building was only 2 stories, the top apartment his. Yet the tapping persisted. Sometimes accompanied by shadows flickering across the ceiling, just in the corner of his vision. Shadows that vanished when he looked directly. He started recording it. Sitting in his apartment with a voice recorder, hoping to catch something concrete. The first few nights, the recordings were just silence. But one morning, he listened back and heard it clearly, a low, uneven voice, whispering his name over and over, layering over itself. Elliot. 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 He began to avoid the ceiling. He stopped looking up, stopped standing near the window that framed the alley. But even then, he felt it watching him, waiting. In mirrors, he sometimes glimpsed movement behind himself. When he turned, nothing was there, but the reflection lingered, just a fraction of a second too long, like it wasn't quite him. He started talking to it. If you're here, say something. A pause. Then the tapping, fast this time, urgent. Stop it, he whispered. The tapping slowed to a deliberate, mocking beat, each tap like a heartbeat out of sync with his own. Eventually, Elliot moved the bed to the center of the room. He stopped sleeping near walls or corners. The whispers grew more insistent, feeding off his fear. His friends noticed his trembling hands, the vacant stare, the way he flinched at quiet knocks. But when he tried to show them, the tapping vanished, leaving only the hollow echo of his own voice. Weeks later, Elliot discovered something in the ceiling tiles above his apartment. A small crawlspace, long forgotten, just wide enough to squeeze into. He hesitated. Something about it felt right. Curiosity overcame him. He climbed in, flashlight in hand, heart hammering. Inside, the space was empty. Dust-covered boards, the faint smell of mildew, nothing more. Relief washed over him. And then he heard it, a soft exhale from behind him. Not a creak, not the wind. A human breath. Elliot spun around. Empty. Just the shadow of the flashlight moving over the boards. He laughed nervously. It's just my mind. A voice answered, low and close, almost inside his skull. We've been waiting. Elliot dropped the flashlight. The light clattered across the boards, spinning in arcs. The shadows danced and stretched impossibly long. And in the corner, where the boards met the wall, something moved, a shape too dark to see clearly, but familiar enough to make him question his own reflection. The last thing he remembered was the whisper, patient, intimate, as if it had always known him. You've been listening to us all along. The neighbors reported the apartment empty the next week. Nothing disturbed, nothing missing. Just a faint, irregular tapping that echoed through the building at night. Third story. Claire had always believed in routines. The world made sense when things happened on time, in order, in the way they were supposed to. She liked her apartment on Hawthorne Street because it obeyed that order, the same creak in the floor at 7:02 a.m., the same sunlight spilling across the kitchen counter at 6:17 p.m. It was small, quiet, predictable, and after years of instability in her life, that predictability had become her anchor. It began subtly. A door ajar that she was sure she had closed. A misplaced cup on the counter. A shadow in the corner of the living room, only noticeable from the corner of her eye. She told herself it was fatigue, that she was imagining things after long days at work. But deep down, a tiny voice whispered otherwise. The first knock came late one Thursday night. Tap, tap, tap. It was deliberate, soft, almost hesitant. Her heart thumped against her ribcage as she froze in bed. It's probably someone's mistake. Maybe a neighbor. But when she peeked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. No one. Not even the faintest shadow. After that night, the knocks became more frequent. They never came during the day. Always after 10. Sometimes a single, soft tap. Sometimes a slow rhythm that seemed to match the beat of her own heart. One night, she stayed awake, clutching a mug of tea that had long gone cold. She pressed her ear against the door. Claire. Her name, drawn out, deliberate, intimate. A chill ran down her spine. She jumped back, her mug shattering on the floor. The next morning, she noticed the coffee cup on her desk at work had been moved. Not dramatically, just slightly, enough to make her pause. And then the notebook she kept to record her tasks was open to a blank page, though she could have sworn she had closed it the night before. Small things. Tiny, almost invisible disturbances. But together, they felt deliberate. She told Marcus, her friend and co-worker, about the incidents. I think I'm losing it, she confessed over lunch, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred her coffee. I hear things. See things. My apartment, it's not right. Marcus looked at her with concern but said gently, Claire, you've been working long hours. Maybe you're exhausted. Stress can do strange things to your mind. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to convince herself. But the apartment didn't care about stress. The knocks, the whispers, the shadows, they persisted, unaffected by rational explanations. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Claire stayed up late, determined to confront whatever haunted her apartment. She lit every lamp, opened the windows for air that smelled faintly of wet asphalt, and armed herself with a kitchen knife. Midnight passed. Nothing. Relief mingled with exhaustion. Then came the presence. A cold, unmistakable sensation at her shoulder. She spun around, knife raised. Nothing. Silence. Then a whisper. Why are you hiding? Her pulse skyrocketed. She stammered, who's there? No answer. Just silence that pressed against her ears, heavy and patient. She began to notice the pattern in the disturbances. The knocks were no longer random, they came in sequences, almost like a message. Shadows lingered slightly longer when she looked away, stretching just beyond the limits of perception. And sometimes, when she walked past mirrors, she glimpsed a figure that mimicked her movements, but with subtle, wrong delays. A fraction too slow. One night, she found something truly unnerving, a post-it note on her nightstand, written in handwriting she did not recognize. I've been here all along. Her hands shook as she held it. She tore it up, flushed the pieces, but she could feel the words lingering in the corners of her mind. Sleep became impossible. She tried sleeping in the living room, in different positions, facing the walls, even covering her eyes with a blanket. But the whispers never stopped. Sometimes her own voice joined the chorus, calling her name when she didn't speak. Finally, she discovered the small crawlspace above the ceiling. She didn't know why she felt compelled to investigate it, only that the apartment seemed to be inviting her. She climbed inside. Dust, mildew, nothing, at least at first. Relief washed over her. And then she felt it, a presence behind her, breathing. Close. Immediate. She turned. Empty. The flashlight's beam trembled across the boards. Shadows pooled unnaturally in the corners. We've been waiting, the whisper came, low, patient. Almost a promise. Her scream was caught in her throat as the ceiling seemed to stretch, the crawlspace folding in impossible angles. She could see herself reflected in fragments in the boards, each reflection subtly wrong, her eyes too wide, her expression a fraction delayed. The last thing she remembered before losing consciousness was the whisper inside her mind. "Do you want to see me?" When the building's landlord checked the apartment a week later, it was empty. No sign of Claire. No disturbances. The crawlspace was clean, the ceiling intact. Only the faint, irregular tapping remained in the apartment, a rhythm out of sync with anything in the world. Some nights, the neighbors claimed they hear whispers through the walls, soft, persistent, and just out of reach. A name, perhaps yours, perhaps theirs, carried on the same irregular beat. And the apartment waits, patient as ever, for the next visitor who believes in routine and silence.